Welcome to the Commonwealth Conservative Podcast. I am your co-host, Jeff Simone, with the man, the myth, the Lord of the Sith, I don't know, Sean Dooley, State Representative. How you doing today, Sean?
Good. That was a new one, Jeff.
Yeah,
Lord of the Sith.
I'm going to run out of things before as these episodes go on. With us today, we have a very important gentleman, a great guy. His name is Anthony Amore. And Anthony, please say hello to everybody at home.
Hello, everybody at home.
All right. Well, we want to get into it with Anthony a little bit because Anthony is the former candidate for Secretary of State in 2018. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. He's a good guy. He is a security expert, and he is also an author. The new book coming out is The Woman Who Stole Vermeer. Tell us a little bit about that before we get into what we brought you in here for today.
Well, thanks. Yeah, The Woman Who Stole Vermeer comes out November 10th. Very excited about it. It's a culmination of about 3 years worth of work. It's this amazing story of this woman who was a British aristocrat born into extreme wealth, studied at Oxford. She was part of the last class of debutantes who went before the Queen, 1958. So she started off her life as this very wealthy, typical British heiress. At some point she changed and decided that she was going to become a revolutionary, and ultimately took up the cause of the IRA. She was running guns. She performed the first aerial attack in Britain after the Blitz. She hijacked a helicopter and dropped bombs on a police station, believe it or not. When the Price sisters, have you ever heard of the Price sisters?
No.
So the Price sisters were two of the first female soldiers in the IRA, and legendary. They bombed the Old Bailey in London, a major terrorist attack. If you would call them terrorists, some wouldn't. They went to prison in England. They saw themselves as political prisoners and demanded to be moved back to Northern Ireland. Rose Dugdale, decided that she would steal 19 priceless paintings to hold them as ransom to get the sisters moved back to Northern Ireland. So she did, and she stole a Vermeer. And it was the biggest art heist in history at the time, and the only one ever performed by a woman, which makes it really remarkable. That's just the beginning of her story. She's just led this incredibly remarkable life that you can't believe. It almost reads like fiction, but it's fact. And she was like Patty Hearst, contemporary of Patty Hearst, only a true believer and not motivated by any relationship with a man or kidnapped into what she did, but truly a revolutionary at heart.
That's amazing. I hadn't heard the story. Looking forward to read the book.
Thank you.
That's definitely going to be a movie.
Well,
when you sell the rights to it, we'll say
we're in process, yeah.
Well, this is actually not the reason we brought Anthony on today.
But it's a good reason. I mean, this is I had no idea that you were this accomplished of an author.
Oh, thanks.
I knew all about your work as a security expert at the Gardner Museum and all this, but I didn't know about that.
Thank you.
Little bit of a bonus here. So, Anthony, the reason why we brought you on here today was to talk about ranked choice voting. Sean, we need we're looking to have this explained to us and to the audience a little bit about what ranked choice voting is, right?
Right, exactly. I mean, it's question 2 on the ballot this year.
Question 2.
And a lot of people, I'm getting a ton of calls, a ton of emails about it because it's very, complicated. It's confusing. I don't obviously all the ads are completely spun and are misleading. So I'm like, you know what? That's a great idea. I knew, Anthony was an expert on this particular topic, so we were able to call and get him booked down here. So I really appreciate it, and have him come down. It's our second podcast, so we do have a piece of our only piece of swag, our neck gaiter for you.
That's great.
So we'll toss that over. We're keeping our social distancing.
Still socially distant.
Still socially distant. So a little gift from the Commonwealth Conservative
Very cool.
podcast. But what we really want to do is be able to get this out to the people so they can hear just fact-based, none of the spin, just all right, what's the pros, what are the cons, what are the, what are the dangers, how is it confusing? And if we can just kind of delve into all of that, I mean,
Well, there's a video I'd like to. So,
all right, yeah,
so
perfect.
The audience,
That's a great one.
I think we're gonna cue that up. So let me put that together here, and a little bit of an explainer for the audience.
Hey, Maine, the time to vote
This is.
for
Oh, wait,
changing
I
your
should say this was for Maine for 4 years ago, but I would assume that it's the same type of process. So here we go.
way of voting is here. Question 5 on the November 8th ballot looks to establish a new system for the state called ranked choice voting. This new method would have voters rank all candidates in order of preference. So if 3 candidates running for office, you would rank your first choice with a 1, second choice 2, and third choice 3. To decide the winner, officials would only tally the ones on each ballot. If a candidate receives 50% or more of all votes, they win. If no candidate earns 50% of total votes, the candidate with the least 1 votes would be thrown out, and a second round of counting would begin. All those who voted a 1 for the eliminated candidate would have their ballots recounted to see who they selected as their number 2 vote. Those number 2 votes would then be added to the totals for the remaining candidates, deciding the winner. Think ranked choice voting is a good idea? Vote yes. Bad idea? Vote no. It's your vote, so vote. That's your
It's your vote, so vote. I like the sound of that. All right, Anthony, I'll kick it off to you. Why? So was that a pretty accurate video? Or are we on track here?
It's an accurate video in the most simplistic terms. It is representative of the perfect scenario. But even in that scenario, the most utopian, beautiful, clean-cut ranked choice voting situation, what you see still is that the person who won that election in that scenario won with second place votes. So they were not elected by people who chose them as their first choice. They were elected by a mishmash of people who said, this is the guy I want to represent us, and people who said, I'd settle for this guy. It's not a good way to run an election. But moreover, again, in reality, these situations are much messier than what you just saw in this video.
Messy politics. Shocking.
Messy, yeah. Well, I'm glad you said that, though, because at its root, I believe that, and as a conservative myself, that elections should be accessible and therefore simple and easy to understand. And as long as man has been having elections of some sort, going back to when they would put rocks into a leather sack, it has been simple and understandable. There's no training required. You don't need even a simplistic video like this. With ranked choice voting, there's a heck of a lot of voter education involved. There's complicated training. In Maine, using this example, when it was implemented in 2018, the pro-ranked choice voting folks put out a guide to help people understand it. It was 19 pages. Think about that. I mean, even when I get into Twitter arguments, which are rarely productive, the pro side will produce a 9 or 10 or 11 tweet thread to explain ranked choice voting. And even if it's a good explanation, that in itself tells you it's not a good system. People should know when they go into the ballot booth what they're doing, make their choice, and leave instead of going in trying to decipher what they're doing, trying to game the system, trying to decide whether they should vote for everybody or one person or some of the people. It adds a layer of complexity. I'll quote Jerry Brown, who I am loath to quote, but he called it complexifying when he said no to it in California, and was followed by Gavin Newsom, who said no to it as well. Neither are conservatives by any stretch.
Two progressives.
Right, and Gavin Newsom had firsthand knowledge of it in San Francisco and saw how poorly it worked. So this is truly a nonpartisan issue. This is about accessibility to the ballot, and people talk about voter suppression, and they like to point towards the party I belong to as suppressing the vote. Ranked choice voting has been shown to suppress the vote in 2 ways. There are studies that show less people come to vote because it's a complicated system. And also because so many ballots, and I know we're going to get to this, become either A, exhausted, or B, spoiled. So in many ways, it lessens the voice of the electorate.
Well, and you happen to bring up San Francisco, and I know that's currently, I mean, San Francisco has been doing this for 15 years, and they've had a lot of issues. Whereas this year, I think is the first time they've had a real controversy, in so much that there's 3 people running for mayor, and there's the main front runner who everyone thought was going to win, and then the second and third person, people that are running, have decided to team up and actually create a campaign where vote for me, number 1, vote for this person, number 2. So they're actually running almost as they're doubling down on the front runner. So really kind of throwing a monkey wrench into the whole process, because people are like, all right, I don't understand, what's going on. It's 2 for 1. Oh, we're going to work together as a team. And that's not what a mayor is, not to mention, the campaign finance implications, the collusion. A campaign shouldn't be colluding to oust another candidate. I think that's one of those things where, that's personally one of my big worries, is that, all right, we start doing this sort of thing, like you said, we could end up with the 3rd place vote getter actually ending up winning if he's gamed the system correctly.
The key, what I would say, is you're on the right track there, and it happens often. So what you just described is a real concern to me. And interestingly, when I debated a pro ranked choice voting person the other day for television, that person introduced that scenario as a plus, where 2 candidates would work together, saying, well, this shows there's less negative campaigning. Well, no, it doesn't. It's 2 people doing negative campaigning against 1. But moreover, I firmly believe the last thing in the world that voters want is more gamesmanship brought into elections. This is sort of what's happening in Maine, too, where Susan Collins' opponent is talking to the 3rd candidate about, to their voters, telling them the best way for them to vote to beat Susan Collins. So it's this odd collusion, as you said, between candidates who all should be running against each other and showing their differences, letting the voter know how they're different. That's one of my great concerns. People point to the election in the 4th Congressional District, the primary election in September. There were 9 candidates, and the winner came away with 22.4% of the vote, and say that's the perfect reason that there should be ranked choice voting. I would argue against that, because if there had been, the ultimate winner would have had a mishmash of 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, and so on votes put onto them to win. It would have been nobody's favorite. It would have just been something that seemed like a nice way to clean it up. I know that the 2nd place finisher, Jesse Mermel, instantly became a big fan of ranked choice voting, which is troublesome to me. The last thing in the world you should do is say, I don't like the results of an election, let's change the system. No, let's have better
Well, that's
candidates.
silly anyway,
Right.
because there's no guarantee if it wasn't RCV vote that she would have won anyway. It
No,
would have been a completely different campaign.
Yep.
And one thing I want to point out that, Sean, you alluded to earlier, there's only one person that can hold the office. Your 2nd or 3rd choice is meaningless, because in that scenario with the San Francisco mayor maybe going on right now, you have a situation where eventually at the end of the day, only one person is going to hold that office. There's no co-mayorship of the 2nd and 3rd place people trying to take out the front runner. So it's almost like a meaningless vote to put your 2nd choice on there.
Well, let me give you an example where you have, rather than use something as simple as the video or as messy as the 4th Congressional, let's say there were 5 candidates. I'll give you an example of what's really bad about this system. So you have your 5 candidates, and nobody gets to 50%, but let's suppose the top 2 get close. Well, what happens is number 5 gets eliminated. So first problem, the least palatable candidate is eliminated, and that candidate alone has his voters have a 2nd vote. Okay, so Think about that. The person who's least
Oh, they get to
liked
they
by
get
the
to vote.
electorate.
They get to vote twice. You mean?
Yes. So
In essence, okay.
So let's take candidate 5, drop him. His voters' second choice have their are distributed. Let's suppose the election ends there. Those votes are enough to put someone over 50%. Well, that means the people who voted for the third place candidate and the fourth place candidate don't have their second choice counted. Therefore, only some people had a second vote. Everyone else voted once. So if you voted for the least palatable guy, you voted twice because you got another shot at the piñata. Nobody else did.
That's a great point, and I think it lends itself to straw candidates and candidates who may not feel very strong or running against a stronger candidate of getting 2 or 3 friends into the race and say, all right, you pick up your family and friends and just make sure everyone puts me down as number 2, and now you got a group of people that aren't even motivated to vote in that particular election or are voting, coming out for the number 5 guy. And while I'm there, I'll put this person down as number 2.
You've disenfranchised the people who voted for 3 and 4.
You have.
Wow.
You've taken the most extreme voters, arguably, because they voted for the person that no one else wanted, and given them a second swing. And it gets much messier because in the second round of ranked choice voting, it's what is called first past the post. So as soon as someone gets over 50% with that redistribution, the election's over. But if you continued counting the second place votes of the guy who finished 4th and the guy who finished 3rd, indeed, someone else might have won. But you don't know because you never count their second place votes.
Oh, interesting.
Right? Because the second place vote's a whole different election, so to speak. Now let's take it, so first of all, I know it's getting messy. The listeners should think, yeah, it is messy. This is the problem. Let's take it a step further. Let's suppose you go through that second round and nobody gets to 50% yet. Now we go to the third round, right? Many people might not have chosen past 2 candidates. If you have not chosen past 2 candidates, your ballot is what's called exhausted. You're not even in it anymore. You're not voting in that third round. You're out, okay? When you're out, when your ballot is exhausted, your ballot no longer counts to the denominator when you're figuring the 50%, okay? In layman's terms, what this means is the ultimate winner doesn't really even get the 50% you saw in that video. So the Maine Policy Institute looked at over 90 elections, and they found that in 61% of those elections, the winner didn't get over 50% of the vote of the people
Of
who
everybody
turned out.
voted. Wow.
They got 50% of the remaining vote. They got 50% of the people who chose 3 candidates in my scenario.
Interesting. So just in layman's terms, just to make it my math simple, if you have 100 people vote and they're spread out 18 through 25 or what however it works out, by the time you get to that third count or even the first count, if a lot of people did bullet and they're like, I'm only voting for Steve, I love Steve, I don't like anybody else, I'm only voting for this one. On the second round, now you're getting who got 50% of 95 people.
Exactly.
And then the third round, it's 50% of 80 people. So, so the overall total voting population actually continues to go down unless everybody puts through, like in the case of the 4th Congressional, 1 through 9, and they go through every single one and don't screw it up along the way.
That is a great illustration. I'm going to use that in future debates.
Can I ask you a question? Yeah. Have you been on? I know I've seen you on some media and on some radio. Have you had the opportunity to in-depth explain it like you just did right now for this, or are many outlets? Yes. I mean, I caught a little bit of you on WBZ last night. Didn't seem like there was a lot of time to explain to get into this. Any other places where you've had this opportunity to really get into kind of a scenario you just explained?
On Dan Ray's show, he let me get into it. It's difficult because, frankly, like when I did the debate with Evan Falchuk and John Keller moderated it, he did a fantastic job being very fair. But when I started getting into this, you could see he was getting confused, and we move on. But
Right.
that's okay, because if you're confusing a political pro, you start to see the problem with the system. Now, in the scenario that you just gave, which again was a beautiful illustration of how this works, ultimately you get 50% of the remaining people. So many people getting disenfranchised. There was an election, I think it was county commissioner in San Francisco in 2010, where it went through a lot of rounds. Ultimately, the winner got 4,000 or so votes. Not over 9,000 were quote unquote exhausted. So that many people who went out and voted that day were out of the process. The winner only wound up getting 4,000 votes. It's a remarkable the way it doesn't work. Now, I have talked to a lot of people on the pro side, and I think that by and large, they're genuinely good people, and they think this is a better system. The problem is that when you turn to them and they give you their goals for the system, the first goal is to get over 50%. And I explained to them what we just went over. It doesn't happen, okay? So it's a nice goal, it doesn't happen. And even in the best case scenario, it's not 50% of the voters, it's 50% of the remainders. Their second goal is to break the quote-unquote duopoly of Democrat versus Republican. And my response to that is, it has, in any place where it's been implemented in the United States, it hasn't happened. It doesn't do it. No third party has risen. No third party candidate has risen. It's a failure. It works nice on paper. It works, I don't know if you've ever seen the mathematical algorithm for ranked choice voting. It's beyond anyone's comprehension. It works if you're a PhD from MIT, in theory. If you're the everyday voter or a candidate, it's a failure. It doesn't accomplish what they think it will, and that's a real problem.
Some of the people I've spoken to about it, they're like, oh, well, this is what they have that altruistic, this gets more people involved, and you really want to have whoever wins, have a majority. I mean, I think that's the driving factor for a lot of people is they, like, oh, someone shouldn't win with only 22% of the vote. And I understand that. And my solution has always been, and I grew up in the South, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, is a jungle primary, where if you have 7 people, they all run. The top 2 vote getters, if no one gets over 50%, then basically have a runoff between those 2. How does this compare to that? And what are your thoughts on doing that from a, and I know it's tough and it's expensive and you have to do another election and things along those lines, but is that a better way to get to the 50%, or at least a more fair way so people know they're choosing between A and B, as opposed to I'm choosing for candidate C and maybe I'll get candidate F in the end?
Far superior. And our side supports that. And that's what they do for the mayor of Boston. It's superior in a number of ways. First, you articulated the best one. It's one person, one vote. And you're voting head to head for somebody. Ranked choice voting is called the automatic runoff. So in theory, it is argued that you're doing that, only you're doing it all in one election. But you're not, because in order to make sure that you have a say in that final head-to-head competition, you will have had to correctly guess the final ranking of everyone. And you would have had to vote for every person who ran to be sure you had a say in that final head-to-head. Now, this goes back to what we were talking about, exhausted ballots. If you don't vote for everybody, you're not guaranteed. If you don't rank everybody, you're not guaranteed to have a voice in the final runoff. Australia saw this problem where they have it, and in Australia they require everyone to rank all the candidates. Now think about how bad that system is. Go back to the 4th Congressional District again. The 3 of us all follow politics as closely as you can follow politics. As you sit here right now, can you name those 9 candidates?
Not even close.
Name
Nor
2.
could I. As you sit here, and even if you had their names in front of you, could you articulate the fine differences between one Brookline liberal and another Brookline liberal?
Right, exactly. I mean, and it's just over. Let's face it, as Americans, we're busy. We've got a lot of things on our plate. There's a 30-second soundbite mentality. Being able to get that knowledge out there is very complicated. Maybe on the presidential level, people are following it, but once you get down to, county commissioner or state rep, the further it gets out from the dominant thing, whereas, a lot of people this election are going into the voting booth to vote for president. And while they're there, all right, we'll move down to U.S. Senate and then state Senate and then county commissioner and state rep and, and sheriff. And there's other things they'll do while they're there. But for the most part, that's not their driving reason they came out. And so now all of a sudden you're like, all right, there's 7 people running for sheriff. I haven't been paying attention to this at all. I'm usually, I'm voting for the Republican or the Democrat because I assume, or a name I recognize. I haven't invested any time in doing this. I've been concentrating on the president because that's the one I'm really interested in. Now all of a sudden they're going to be forced to do that. And so then it becomes a lot of eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Well, this guy has an Irish name. I'll vote for him. I'll give him a number 2. This guy lives in, next town over. I'll give him a number 3. That's going to be our choice process.
Right. Now, the advocates would say, well, then just go in and vote for one person. Sure. And if that person is eliminated first, you're out when other people are taking other swings at the plate on that day. 2 pieces of data to back up exactly what you said. First, the Pew Research Center looked at the 2016 presidential campaign, and less than 50% of Hillary Clinton supporters could articulate her stances on everything. The same is true of President Trump. It's not that people aren't sophisticated, it's that people don't have the time to invest into researching candidates. Now, in 2018, because I ran for Secretary of State, because I'm interested in elections, I became, after the victory by Bill Galvin over me, I talked to people because I heard the next big thing was ranked choice voting. And I met with someone from the pro side who still works for them. And he explained it to me, and the first thing that came to mind was, I don't like this system, and here's why, and I still stick to this. In 2018, Jeff Deal ran against Elizabeth Warren. It was a head-to-head competition. Jeff spent over $2 million. He traversed the state in a RV with his face and name on it. I can personally attest to the fact he worked his tail off, and he was on TV and radio, and he was running against the second most popular politician in the state, a household name. Less than 10 days before the election in November, MassSync polling group put out a poll of registered voters. 36% had never heard of Jeff Deal.
Right.
Imagine going in and trying to rank 5 people in a state rep race. It's not realistic. It's totally not pragmatic. It's a mess. And we should not have our elections resort to ranked guess voting, because that's what it'll be. It'll be people going in and guessing if they feel. People have a tendency to vote as much as they can. I don't know what. Do you have town meeting here? Is it?
Yeah. So open town meeting.
Open. So I used to be a member of the Swampscott elected town meeting, and you would go in and it would be vote for your top 20, and there'd be 25 people. Your instinct is to vote for 20. I'm going to pick 20, and like you said, oh, there's an Irish name, or sounds vaguely familiar. This guy lives on my street. But if you had to say what they believe, you couldn't. But people are inclined to vote as much as they can. There's no question people would be guessing in a ranked choice voting scenario.
That's exactly. And I guess one of the things that worries me. I'm a former town clerk, and I know how many spoiled ballots we have on a normal case. I would assume if you're starting to, all right, I've got all these dots all over the place, and so you think about it on an election, you could have, instead of 1 in each category, you could have 5 or 6 in each category. So now we're talking 36 times you're having to fill in a dot. If you've done, put 2 people in the number 4 position, I would assume that spoils your ballot and you have to start all over.
Yeah, could you get into spoiled ballots?
Sure.
Yeah.
So your ballot's out. It's a spoiled ballot. It's as if you didn't vote.
Well, but let's so the audience is clear. What exactly is the scenario that makes it a spoiled ballot?
Well, sure. So you would have one of these bubble sheets.
Okay.
And let's suppose you vote, you choose 2 different people for your second choice. Your ballot's out. It's a spoiled ballot. Now, it sounds like, well, bubble sheet's easy to fill in. No, it's difficult. It's difficult for people who've never used it before. Studies have shown that it's more difficult for people for whom English is a second language. Exit polls have shown that older voters have the most trouble with it. And one of my most interesting piece of data is in Kansas, there was an election in which 10% of the votes were thrown out in this election. 10%. And the areas that these most votes were thrown out were communities of color and lower income areas. And this data didn't come from Judicial Watch. This is data from the ACLU of Kansas. It's problematic, right? This is not right-wing propaganda. This is why the NAACP of New York State rejects ranked choice voting. This is why Jesse Jackson rejects ranked choice voting. It discriminates.
No, I was going to say, and in Massachusetts, you'd put it into the machine, and it would kick back out, and then the town clerk would come over and be like, "Can I look at your?" I'm like, "Oh, you did this, wrong. We'll give you a new ballot. You can start all over again." And the person's like, "I'm late for work. I don't have time for this." Or they get frustrated, or they're like, "Screw it. I'm just going to vote for the one thing I actually cared about. I'm voting for the president. I'm filling this dot in. I'm putting it in." And so now they actually took the time to fill all these things out and go through it. And they're like, second time around, be like, "Listen, this is too much of a headache. I don't want to make the mistake again and have to do it a third time." And that's just for those folks at home. Third time's the charm. That's the most times you get to do it. So if you screw it up a third time, do we have that little womp 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 button? There we go. That you're out. And so you completely accidentally disenfranchised yourself, even though you've been at the freaking polling place for 15 minutes doing a third go at it and filling out all these dots. And if you have a miss mark, or you start to write fill someone down number 3 and like, "Oh no, I want him number 4," you can't erase. It's a permanent marker. You got to say, "All right, can I get another ballot?" And after 3 times, they're out.
It even gets more complicated. So
even more complicated.
I mean, I was going to touch on something you just mentioned, that this is very much a nonpartisan issue.
Absolutely.
in my mind. I mean, we're all Republicans here, and maybe those on the left are pushing RCV, but it seems to me that if you break this down and talk to anybody logically at length, as we're given the opportunity to do on this podcast, it becomes less and less a partisan issue and just a common sense issue.
Right. Well, and one of the things that really surprises me is the, from the traditional Democratic Party, is that they're not pushing back on this at all, even though this is being driven by the progressives and the socialists, because they're wanting to get in and say, all right, if we can do this sort of thing with, we'll get 2 or 3 different people, with these hardcore ultra left agendas, we'll be able to oust the incumbent. We'll be able to oust the traditional Democrat who has has the union backing and the working class backing, all the traditional Democratic areas.
the Capuano.
Right. Exactly. Perfect example.
Well, first of all, let me say it's great to be talking to a person who was a clerk, because the clerks are the great unmentioned when you talk about these voting reforms. Now, the scenario you gave presumes that vote can be counted in the town, but that's not the case. These ranked choice ballots have to be counted at central locations because of the algorithm and the software involved. So in Maine, when they had it in 2018, it took 8 days to get the ballots counted because all the ballots had to be transported to a central location. So the pro side will say, no, it's because the Secretary of State scheduled it for 8 days later. Yes, because the ballots had to be transported. Secondly, clerks are always left out. I've learned this when I ran for Secretary of State. I always think about mail-in voting. Nobody's picturing Swampscott, where they have 1.5 employees in the clerk's office having to count and manage all of these mailed-in ballots. You know, worse off, imagine a hand recount of ranked choice ballots. It's a nightmare scenario.
It really. I didn't realize they had to go to a central tabulation facility, or we're going to have a huge process of buying all new machines and software and things along those lines.
Right.
But you just brought up a good point, which I've been remiss to mention in the past, is when we're talking about spoiled ballots, that's one of the big problems with mail-in voting. If somebody marked on their ballot two things somewhere down the line, it's when they put it through the machine on election day, one, they don't know whose it is, so it's not like they can call up and say, hey, what did you mean to vote? They have to say, all right, well, this ballot is spoiled, and we're going to have to put it off to the side, put it as a provisional, maybe use it as a hand recount. But whereas if you're voting on election day or in-person early voting, the clerk can be like, all right, the reason the machine kicked it back is because of you accidentally marked, this one said pick 2 and you picked 3, that sort of thing. Once you go into the early voting where you're picking 30 different scenarios, that's just, I can't imagine there won't be a ton of spoiled. Has there been a history of a bunch of spoileds, or?
In every place where ranked choice voting was implemented, there is a marked increase in spoiled ballots. That's indisputable. And that's the interesting thing about being on the being opposed to ranked choice voting is all the arguments are nice, all the philosophical things are nice, the goals are pretty. The data in every instance is on our side. And interesting, that's a segue to another data point related to what you said about, Sean, what you said about why people would want ranked choice voting is look at the money that's come into Massachusetts in this. Now, the pro side has well over $5 million to spend in trying to get ranked choice voting implemented. Most of it, the lion's share of that money, has come from 3 sources. Jonathan Soros, the son of George Soros, one of Rupert Murdoch's daughters-in-law, and a former Enron executive, a billionaire from Enron. Of the 16 top donors to ranked choice voting, 14 come from out of state. Well over 80% of the money that their side has comes from out of state. Why is there so much interest in changing the way that we vote in Massachusetts? And it's precisely what you said. It's about power. It's not about fairness. It's not about accessibility. It's about power. Some of the grassroots people on the ground in Massachusetts might be doing it for altruistic reasons, but there's a power grab involved in the money. And our side, we have thousands of dollars, not many thousands either. And we're not out there, and you guys are both on mailing lists. You probably haven't received a solicitation. Because
I don't believe I have, actually. Which is, I get solicitations on my phone, like best I can tell, every 15 minutes from every Republican in the country. But
those are the most annoying.
Oh, they really are.
I'm getting them 4 times a day.
And I'm like, stop. Then it's like, all right, thanks for saying stop. Here's a different one. I'm like, all right, well, that's not helping me. So I think it's but that's whenever anyone asks me about any all these bizarre political things that are always going on, my go-to is always follow the money. All right, somebody is making out somewhere. No one's spending $5 million just because,
they care about Massachusetts.
They're your heiress, who really cares about the IRA. There's something else going on, and I just worry about. We worry about Russian collusion. We worry about the what's going on in IT and social media and things like that, and how it could be manipulated. And we're getting busier as families, and we've got kids that we're homeschooling now, and we're doing all these crazy things. And then on top of this, we're going to get a barrage of people with a lot of money being able to feed these scenarios to us, and we don't know the end game. If this person is gets a ton of money in, and they're telling you to vote for this other person for number 2, was that person ever really running? was their design is they were running and funneling additional money. Is a few certain people sponsoring these top 3 people,
Right.
and it's all a game. Everybody vote. We really want, candidate X, so we'll put in these other people. We'll drive money to all of them equally, and with the message, the message being, all right, this one, everybody's voting for this person for number 2.
Right.
That's scary.
It is very scary, and it's happening, and it concerns me because I don't think people understand in Massachusetts that on November 3rd, I firmly believe they will be casting the most important vote that they've maybe will ever cast on question 2. And most people don't know what it is. I think it's far more important than your presidential vote. I mean, Donald Trump is not going to win Massachusetts. However, if question 2 passes, you will have your voting system, the power system in Massachusetts, changed forever. Well, I should give a caveat on forever. In Ann Arbor, Michigan, in I'm trying to think of the other cities, in the state of North Carolina, in Burlington, Vermont, in other cities that tried ranked choice voting, they repealed it soon after because they saw what a disaster it was.
Right. I'm gonna go off camera 1 second just because I want to grab something because I'm remembering something one particular way. I just want to make sure I'm right.
Well,
So you guys keep talking.
Anthony, I have a question. I have a couple questions for you on those spoiled ballots. If somebody has, their ballot becomes spoiled for one race, does it at least count for the other races that they voted in?
I don't know.
Okay, so nobody knows, though. That ballot goes to the side, but their choice for governor, senator, president may or may not be counted. We don't know that right now.
Well, ranked choice voting won't count for federal elections yet in Massachusetts. It's
Okay.
initially for state level, except for a few county type races. But you would envision that ultimately it would, because that's what they're doing in Maine. It's going to
Okay,
be.
so it would actually replace that now. So second question here.
And Jeff, I can answer that. It does spoil the entire ballot because you're putting it through
Really?
the machine and it kicks it out.
That's dangerous.
So then we would have to create a law that says, all right, now, basically what you would typically do is you would put it in provisionals, and that way the Board of Registrars would look at it afterwards and say, all right, when they're doing the final tally, all right, well, we can tell that, these 3 things were voted just with one person. So we know that's supposed to be them. So we will put this one in, on the final hand count,
Right.
hopefully. But whatever portion they spoiled, it gets completely tossed out. But now we're creating
a bad scenario for
a
town
bad
clerks.
scenario.
Yeah,
It's
or
tough for town
whoever-
clerks
whoever.
and Board of Registrars, and it's it leaves a lot of things open for interpretation. It just really, really muddies the water. So
Next question, Anthony, on that is, so this would replace the party primary system. Is RCV then like there's no primaries a few months before, it just becomes election day and the ranked choice?
No, there would still be primaries.
So the primary for any office, so say the 4th Congressional, and say there was a similar scenario on the Republican side, you would do the RCV for both parties, and then for November 3rd, it would be who? The top 2 nominees for the party, or what?
No, for ranked choice would, so using the 4th Congressional, whoever would have won after ranked choice voting would go on to the general.
So just one person out of the primary.
but
It would be RCV elections for the primary, but if you had an independent independent candidate running, or 2 independent candidates for the general,
exactly, that's
then
where it
you'd
becomes
still have RCV kicking off for the general.
exactly. So that's where it becomes the gamesmanship really puts into play. If you have a lot of money and you have one particular cause, you can get 2 other people that are like-minded to be running as well as independents, and with a mission that all right, everybody vote for candidate X, as their number 2, and so now we're having 3 different people with 3 different messages all focused on this one particular candidate,
Yeah.
as opposed to the, let's say in this particular case it's the Republican, and you have someone that's more libertarian leading, and you have someone more that's just a middle of the road person, and so and the Democrat is far left as opposed to center left. What they can do is basically say, all right, let's basically gang up, because the last thing we want to do is have this person in. So let's all work together, and the person in the middle can actually go run more liberal, because they're not going to win anyway. So let's put someone out there that's more liberal, and let's split that vote and say, all right, I'm going to run as a liberal against this person, but my second choice, vote for the conservative. I just worry about the gamesmanship. And I went over to grab a ballot because I wanted to make sure, Anthony said, this question 2 is probably the most important thing. After the state rep for the 9th Norfolk District,
Of course.
is the most important thing on the ballot. I think that he forgot that part of his equation. But so I went and grabbed a ballot. So I have a sample ballot here. And so I was like looking at it. I'm like, all right, let's see where question number 2 is. Well, we got everybody, the presidential, the important state rep part, county commissioner, sheriffs. Question 1, there's no question 2 on this. No question 2. You have to know, and a lot of people don't, because I've seen this time and time again, you got to flip it over
Oh my goodness.
and know that it's on the back.
Wow.
So probably the most important thing that we have that will completely change our voting for years to come, a ton of people won't do, because they're going in, like I said, they're predominantly going in to vote for president. Oh, while I'm here, I'll do all this other stuff. Bring it in, boom. Because there's not, it says continued on back way down here. If you read through all of this, then at the end it says continued on back. I would kind of think that, that's question 1, more information about question 1 continued on the back. I'm not necessarily thinking I need to flip it over. So there's going to be a ton of people that don't even know about question 2, because that's not what they're focused on. They're focused on the presidential election, and that's what they're doing. So they're going to go submit it. And so I would be willing to bet there are more blanks on question 2 than there are question 1.
That's scary.
Well, the ballot itself, if you look at it, it intuitively it looks like it ends on page 1 because there's so much blank space at the bottom.
Right, exactly.
Right. So I'm
For
very concerned.
for those at home.
I'm so glad you brought that out, Sean. It's incredibly concerning to me, because it's going to be the activists for question 2 who are going to know to flip over the ballot. We have to get the word out to people, say, flip it over.
Flip it over.
And to everyone, because I want everyone to flip it over and read it. Just look at that and tell me you would vote for that. It's so confusing, even in the best attempt by the Secretary of State's office to make it clear. Look at that. It's a disaster. Anybody tries to read what question 2 says will instantly say no. But can we get them to flip it over and actually vote against it is the key.
Right. Because I think, like you said, the touchy-feely spin, this gives everybody more of a choice. And it's, this way we don't have someone that has 30% becoming your candidate. Yeah, that sounds nice. If that's really your concern, then go with the jungle primary. Go with the top 2 winners, go on to a runoff. There we go. Everyone gets a vote. We know how it is. There's another 4 weeks where they can campaign. I'm fine personally getting rid of the whole primary system. I don't even care about that. Let's have the primary be a runoff election. Put everybody on the same ballot. If you get lucky and you got 50%, then you don't need to be out there holding signs and doing all the campaigning afterwards, because you have a strong candidate who is has a strong level of support. And then you can move forward, but everyone else can then go into a system where you're like, all right, these are our two people.
Right.
Plain and simple. We're not confusing with independents. There's no ability to play games. There's no straw candidates, anything along those lines. Once you get to that level, top 2, then out of that, you got the 50%. And the people who didn't get to vote on that first one, the candidates can still say, well, I endorse candidate A or I endorse candidate B. They can still go out there and stump for them. Their supporters can then join a particular team. People will also be given more time to be like, all right, now that my guy didn't win, let me do a little investigation on these other two and figure out who best represents me.
Exactly. And I mean, a great illustration is was it the last or the second to last mayoral election where the runoff was Walsh and Connolly.
Right.
And they were head to head. And just think those two, even just in a head to head, what was the difference between them? Is two spenders.
Right.
It's funny as a Republican because when I'm arguing for a traditional runoff, the other side, which is typically liberal, is saying, oh, it's much more expensive. And I'm saying, all of a sudden, you're worried about the government spending money on something. It's unbelievable. And I feel okay saying spend it because that's a proper function of government, conducting an election. But for them to be talking about fiscal responsibility, which is, I should mention the other thing I have found really bothersome as I've been advocating against ranked choice voting is when I went before the Ed board at the Globe. It was amazing because, listen, I've been there before. I know they're not going to go with you. They're not going to go on your side. But the contempt they had from the onset was disconcerting. And it became clear to me why, because they kept getting off of the issue of ranked choice voting. Even when I would bring up the disparities against lower income and people of color, didn't care. Kept asking me about how Mass Fiscal was connected to ranked choice voting and our side against it. And I would tell them they're not. It's not. I don't work for Mass Fiscal. I've donated to them in the past, but I'm not an employee. And that's all they want to know. How is Mass Fiscal Alliance connected to this?
It's almost like they're complete frauds.
That's frightening. And I guess the really easy, but jungle primary, there is no additional cost in that, provided you replace the traditional primary. We'd still have the primary election on September 1st. It would just be, you just wouldn't do it as a party primary. And then you would have the regular election on November 3rd. So there's no additional cost there. So I think that kind of even defeats their argument on that, right? I mean, I guess unless you want to have a third election where you have a party primary and then an election and then a runoff after that, if they truly care about independence and having an additional party and have it not be red versus blue all the time, and that's one of their big things that they're pitching, I think having the runoff is probably a jungle primary is probably the easiest, because that'll give the opportunity for an independent to be on the final ballot, with it just being two. I mean, if there's now, let's face it, we're in Massachusetts, we're in Cambridge, right now you have a primary, you have a more centrist Democrat versus a more independent Democrat,
or a communist,
or a communist or social, whatever. But you get, they'll have their primary, which has very, very low turnout. Maybe you'll get 10% turnout in a typical year, and then the general, which has an 85% turnout, and their choice is between whoever won their primary and either nobody or a Republican who's not going to win in Cambridge no matter what, but he automatically gets a pass just because he collected 150 signatures, gets to be on that final ballot that gets to see 85% of the people. Wouldn't it be better to have everybody in that primary? The Republican, never going to win in Cambridge, gets to 3%. Then the top two Democrats, one who's a centrist and one who's a communist, or a liberal and a communist, or what, however it works out, or two communists, whatever. They then go forward to the main election, which is going to get the largest turnout. Right. That's where everybody's going to vote. So isn't that the best way to really, really help our country and a third party, or just get, if you want people to be engaged and really participate, isn't that the best way to do it?
It sounds it, and I can tell you that the arguments for this system, for ranked choice voting, often revolve around helping a third party rise. And because of that, the libertarians are very much, and they're the loudest and most hostile against me, on they really want ranked choice voting. And it's a strange year because they're not seeing that ranked choice voting is not going to help libertarians rise and become a more powerful force. There are other things that might help, like you described, or just like the ballot in Massachusetts, where the incumbent's name comes first, and then next to it says incumbent, or the way it's financed. These things have much more impact than ranked choice voting. I mean, I think they have a fantasy where if we had, no electoral college, and there was a popular election of the president, that somehow Jo Jorgensen would rise. Well, no, her biggest problem is she can't get on the debate stage, right? It doesn't have to do with the fact that we have a traditional one person, one vote ballot. So in other words, it's a solution to a problem that doesn't exist. There are problems in our system. Every system made by man has problems, but this is not a solution to any of it. Doesn't accomplish anything they say it will, ever. Now, when I ask for examples, well, give me for instance, where ranked choice voting has accomplished what you hope it will. No word of a lie. The three examples they give me are Ireland, which has a totally different tradition of party, political parties.
Yeah, there's 3 or 4 parties, and
right.
Yeah,
right. And it's
I was going to say, actually, probably I think it's 5 or 6. I mean, because you got Sinn Féin,
Yeah.
you got conservative, you got liberal, you got the
they have to
the
form.
centrist,
They have to
and
form,
they form coalitions.
coalition
Exactly.
governments. Yeah.
totally different system.
Yeah.
Same with Australia, but Australia has a different ranked choice system where you have to choose, you have to rank everyone. And Papua New Guinea.
Well, everybody knows Papua New Guinea is a big success on their ranked choice.
Everyone is aware of the parallels between Papua New Guinea and Massachusetts. I mean, those are the examples. And again, they seem like nice people the locals seem like nice people with a honest agenda. The problem is, in no part of the argument are they right. None. It's a rare situation to go into a debate with someone and be, from our side, be right on everything. Everything. From the money to who's backing it to why we shouldn't do it to the problems with it. I mean, in the last debate I did on WBZ with Evan Falchuk, this example he keeps using about when you go into Dunkin' Donuts, if they don't have your first choice, to choose your second or third. And it's just such a bizarre example because when you go, the more accurate.
The first choice isn't going to disappear on the ballot. I mean,
well, even
when
still,
you go into the donut shop and they don't have your first choice, okay, you pick your second choice, but the ballot will always have your first choice because you're going there to vote for that office.
Well,
what a stupid example.
Well, the example is more painful than that in my mind because most of us know when we go into Dunks the difference between a Boston cream and an old fashioned, right?
Right.
But if Sean, if you said to me, hey, on your way home for lunch, stop at, Joe's restaurant. They have the best chicken pot pie, and I go in and they say, we don't have it today. I don't have any idea what else there is to choose. It's a guess.
Right.
I don't know what the second best and the third, but that's what an election is like, So they don't have a good argument, and their argument always falls apart when you bring up data. And there's nothing that gets people more upset than when you're able to prove them wrong with data. So I just hope we can reach enough people. It's all about message, not about money from our side. Again, we haven't been asking for, we'll take them. We haven't been asking for contributions. We've just been very aggressive trying to get in every show, writing letters to the editor and op-eds and doing debates and hoping that people understand there's no reason to change this.
Does the No Side have a website where people, if they want to get more information, they can go on, or
We do.
or make a donation?
Yeah, or make a donation. We'd love it. It's rankedchoiceisnochoice.com. Rankedchoiceisnochoice.com. On that site, we have 6 bullet points with links to back them up. not just claims, but links, explaining to people the problems with this system that range from the money to the discrimination to the spoiled and exhausted ballots to the utter confusion people feel when they look at the ballot in the voting booth. And at the end of the day, we take away everything else. A ballot should be simple and easy to use. That's the fairest system for all walks of life. And the data does show that in places where educational achievement is the lowest, the number of spoiled ballots is the highest. And it's a sad fact, but that is the fact. And we don't want to disenfranchise people. And again, I don't know why the other side ignores this for the sake of this.
I have some suspicions, but
I'd love to hear them. Tell me, can you say them? 'Cause
yeah,
don't
I
know
think
them.
I think they're paid off and or naive, or both.
Or both.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the naive. I honestly believe everyone that I've spoken to about this. I'm not talking about the Soroses and the billionaires that are involved. I think there's a different ulterior motive there, but I think most of the people that I've spoken to are thinking, just this utopia of, wouldn't this be great if, I had, I knew these three candidates really, really well, and if this guy couldn't win, then, I want this woman here. And because I know her and, she's very close to my, beliefs, or I'm torn between candidate A and B. I know C I hate, but I got to flip a coin. Now I don't have to flip a coin. So I think there's a lot of that people have this vision or fantasy of, voting for, prom king and queen, where they actually know the people and they really like it and they're torn between a couple of their good friends. That's not the case when you have 9 people,
No.
on the ballot in the congressional, 4th congressional.
Well, perfectly said again. And I would say, even in that utopian situation, like the video and the one you just described, where there's 3 candidates, we have an example. In 2018, Bruce Poliquin, the congressman in Maine, ran for re-election. He won in the traditional count. When ranked choice voting kicked in, he lost by a hair. He won the election with 2,000 more votes than the second place finisher. But when ranked choice kicked in, second place finisher wound up beating Bruce. The irony is, because neither had gotten to 50%.
Right.
The irony is, when you look at ballots that were spoiled, and take those out of the denominator, yes, the second place finisher won. But when you add those back in, for everyone who voted that day, the quote unquote winner did not get 50%. He got something like 48.9. So
Right.
it didn't accomplish what their utopian dream is. All it did was elect the second place finisher to Congress, Bruce Poliquin's home. He won the election. And that brings you back to Massachusetts. The state constitution, written by a very wise man named John Adams, when he wrote the oldest continuous functioning constitution in the world, said that the winner of these elections is the person that gets the most votes, not the majority of the votes. Right? He had the foresight to know there could be more than one party. In fact, most of them hoped there would be more than one party. So he understood that there could be multiple candidates on the ballot. Indeed, that was the norm. However, he understood that it should be the person who gets the most, not 50%. Right? So there will, if somehow question 1 wins, which I don't think it's going to, but if it does,
Question 2.
I'm so sorry. The one in the back of the
We
form.
can cut that- maybe we'll cut that part out.
The back page, yeah, please. The back page referendum. If question 2 passes, you can bet your bottom dollar there are going to be constitutional challenges to it immediately.
Right.
And our Constitution plainly says, and I'm not an attorney, but it plainly says the majority of, the most votes, not the majority of votes.
All right.
I really appreciate you coming on. You explained a ton for me. Hopefully the viewers got to understand this a lot better. I know I understand it a lot better, and
This is a fascinating episode.
I know I'm going to flip over and vote no on number 2 is what I'm now going to do. So I appreciate it.
Well, I
It's a
can,
pleasure.
for the voters out there, flip it, don't skip it, vote no, for me anyway, on question 2. If you have the idea that you think ranked choice voting is a good idea, well, I guess vote for it, but I will be voting no. You are listening to the Commonwealth Conservative Podcast. I am Jeff Simone. He is Sean Dooley. Our guest today was Anthony Amore, the author of The Woman Who Stole Vermeer, a security expert and leader of the No on 2 effort. What's that website one more time, Anthony?
RankedChoiceIsNoChoice.com.
RankedChoiceIsNoChoice.com. Check it out. Please support them. Spread the word to vote no on 2. And we will talk to you folks next time. Have a great day.